In the spring of 1942, the Pacific Ocean became the arena for an unprecedented type of warfare. The Japanese Empire, having seized vast territories from Burma to the islands of the Central Pacific in just 5 months, continued its lightning advance. The American fleet, recovering from the blow at Pearl Harbor, sought an opportunity to halt this momentum. It was in the waters of the Coral Sea that a battle destined to forever change the nature of naval warfare would take place. Japanese Imperial Command developed an operation codenamed MO. The objective was to capture Port Moresby on the southern coast of New Guinea. This Australian port held strategic significance, opening the path to isolating Australia from the United States. Control over Port Moresby would allow the Japanese to establish a powerful base for further operations in the South Pacific. The plan called for an amphibious landing at Port Moresby and the simultaneous capture of Tulagi Island in the Solomon Islands archipelago. To cover the operation, the Japanese allocated significant naval forces. The strike force included the heavy carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku, which were among the finest ships in the Imperial fleet. These carriers had participated in the attack on Pearl Harbor and had experienced crews. The light carrier Shoho was to provide direct support for the amphibious forces. Several cruisers and destroyers rounded out the formation. Admiral Takagi Takeo assumed command of the carrier force, while Rear Admiral Hara Chuichi commanded the carriers directly. The Japanese were confident of success. American cryptographers achieved a breakthrough by partially cracking the Japanese naval code JN-25. A radio intercept station in Hawaii picked up Japanese messages and forwarded them to specialists. Pacific Fleet Command received invaluable information about enemy intentions. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, learned of the planned operation against Port Moresby. Nimitz understood the significance of this port for the defense of Australia and Allied communications. He decided to deploy all available carrier forces to counter the Japanese plan. Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher received command of the task force. Under his command were the carriers Lexington and Yorktown with full air groups. Lexington was one of the first American carriers, built on the hull of an unfinished battlecruiser. The ship carried over 80 aircraft of various types. Yorktown represented a more modern design and also had a powerful air group. Accompanying cruisers and destroyers strengthened the formation. American command knew a serious test lay ahead. On May 1st, Japanese forces began moving toward their objectives. Transports carrying the landing force headed for Port Moresby, escorted by the light carrier Shoho and several cruisers. The main force with the heavy carriers moved to the east, ready to repel any American fleet opposition. On May 3rd, the Japanese occupied Tulagi Island without resistance, establishing a seaplane base there. Fletcher received news of the Japanese landing on Tulagi only on May 4th. He immediately dispatched Yorktown to strike at Japanese forces on the island. On the morning of May 4th, aircraft from Yorktown attacked Tulagi in 3 waves. The strike proved less effective than the Americans had hoped. Only a few small ships and seaplanes were sunk. However, this raid alerted the Japanese to the presence of American carriers in the area. Both forces now knew of the other's existence and searched for each other in the waters of the Coral Sea. Weather in the region was variable, with clouds and rain fronts, which complicated aerial reconnaissance. On May 5th and 6th, the opponents maneuvered, trying to locate each other's carriers. Reconnaissance aircraft scoured vast expanses of ocean. On the morning of May 7th, a Japanese reconnaissance plane spotted American ships. The pilot reported 2 cruisers and a carrier. Admiral Hara immediately dispatched a strike group of 78 aircraft to attack this target. The Japanese pilots believed they had found one of the main American carriers. In reality, the discovered ships were the oiler Neosho and the destroyer Sims. The scout had mistaken the large tanker for a carrier. When the strike group reached the target, the Japanese pilots quickly realized the mistake. However, orders were orders, and they attacked the discovered ships. The destroyer Sims was sunk by a direct hit. Her hull broke in half and she sank rapidly. The tanker Neosho took numerous hits and caught fire, but remained afloat for several more days. Almost simultaneously, American scouts also made an error in their report. They discovered 2 cruisers and reported them as carriers. Fletcher sent a strike group of 93 aircraft from both carriers. Already airborne, the pilots received a corrected reconnaissance report about the actual composition of the discovered group. The American aircraft continued searching and soon actually did find a carrier. It was the light carrier Shoho, escorting the invasion convoy. The ship was sailing with an escort of 4 cruisers. The strike group commander quickly organized the attack. Dive bombers and torpedo bombers attacked Shoho almost simultaneously from different directions. The Japanese carrier had no chance against such a massive attack. The first torpedoes hit the port side of the ship. Bombs pierced the deck and exploded inside the hull. Within minutes, Shoho had taken more than 10 torpedo and bomb hits. The ship stopped, engulfed in flames and smoke. The crew began abandoning the doomed vessel. Half an hour later, Shoho capsized and sank, taking with her more than 600 crew members. The sinking of an enemy carrier became the Americans' first success in this battle. However, the Japanese invasion convoy, having lost its air cover, turned back and postponed the landing. The main forces of both sides still had not engaged. The heavy carriers continued searching for each other across the expanses of the Coral Sea. By the evening of May 7th, both sides had a rough idea of the enemy's location. The Japanese had lost Shoho, but their main strike forces remained intact. The Americans celebrated their first success, but understood that the main battle still lay ahead. Admiral Hara decided to strike in the evening, hoping to catch the Americans off guard at dusk. 27 Japanese aircraft took off from Shokaku and Zuikaku for an evening attack. However, the weather rapidly deteriorated, and cloud cover thickened. In the gathering twilight, the Japanese pilots lost their bearings. Some aircraft accidentally came upon the American formation, but couldn't organize an attack in the darkness and clouds. American combat air patrol fighters raised the alarm. A brief air battle erupted at dusk over the ocean. Several Japanese planes were shot down, while the rest disappeared into the darkness. Returning to their carriers, the Japanese pilots completely lost their orientation. Some aircraft mistakenly tried to land on the American carriers, taking them for their own ships. Anti-aircraft gunners opened fire, and several more Japanese aircraft were shot down. Of the 27 aircraft in the evening attack, fewer than half returned to base. The night passed in tense anticipation. Both sides knew that morning would bring the decisive clash. Carriers maneuvered in the darkness, trying to occupy advantageous positions for the morning strike. Crews prepared aircraft, refueled tanks, loaded torpedoes and bombs. Pilots rested before the coming battle. The ocean around them was dark and ominous. The dawn of May 8th brought variable clouds and good visibility. Both admirals simultaneously sent reconnaissance aircraft to search for the enemy. Time worked against both sides. Whoever first discovered the enemy carriers would gain a decisive advantage in delivering the first strike. Scouts fanned out over the ocean. An American reconnaissance plane from Lexington spotted the Japanese formation at 8:15. The pilot transmitted coordinates and a description of targets. Almost simultaneously, a Japanese scout found the American carriers. Now both sides knew the enemy's location. The race against time had begun. Fletcher immediately ordered the launch of strike groups. From the decks of Lexington and Yorktown, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and escort fighters took off one after another. Takeoff and formation took precious time. The Americans launched 75 aircraft for the strike. The planes set course for the target. The Japanese acted faster and more efficiently. Their crews had more experience with such operations. From Shokaku and Zuikaku rose a group of 69 aircraft. The Japanese and American strike groups passed on opposite courses over the ocean. Both groups were heading to strike the enemy's carriers. For the first time in history, two carrier forces were engaging in battle while beyond visual range of each other. The American strike group reached the Japanese formation around 11 o'clock. The Japanese carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku were sailing with an escort of 2 heavy cruisers. A fighter combat air patrol circled above the formation. The Japanese were ready to repel the attack. Anti-aircraft guns on the ships prepared for battle. The American aircraft split up to attack both targets. Fighters engaged the Japanese air patrol. Torpedo bombers descended over the water and began their attack runs from different directions. Dive bombers climbed to altitude for their dives. Ships of the Japanese formation began energetic maneuvering, trying to evade the torpedoes. Shokaku took the brunt of the attack. The first wave of torpedo bombers attacked the ship from the port side. The carrier turned sharply, and the torpedoes passed by. However, the dive bombers were already entering their dives. Anti-aircraft fire created bursts in the air, but couldn't stop the attack. Two heavy bombs hit the forward section of Shokaku's flight deck. The explosions tore up the deck and started fires. A third bomb hit the middle section of the ship. The carrier lost the ability to launch and recover aircraft. Damage control parties fought the fires. The ship maintained speed and steering, but as a carrier, she was temporarily out of action. Smoke from the fires rose high above the ocean. Zuikaku had better luck. The ship had entered a rain squall in time, where visibility was very poor. American pilots lost sight of her. Only a few aircraft managed to attack the second carrier, but scored no hits. Zuikaku remained undamaged and capable of continuing operations. The American aircraft, having expended their ordnance, set course for home. Losses amounted to several planes shot down by fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Pilots reported hits on one of the carriers. The results of the attack were decent, but not decisive. One Japanese carrier damaged, the second still operational. While the Americans attacked the Japanese carriers, the Japanese strike group reached the American formation. Lexington and Yorktown were sailing several miles apart, escorted by cruisers and destroyers. Radars detected the approach of enemy aircraft. Combat air patrol fighters received orders to intercept. The Japanese group flew in tight formation at an altitude of 4,000 meters. American fighters attacked the formation, trying to disrupt its organization. An air battle developed. Several Japanese planes were shot down, but the main force broke through to the targets. The Japanese pilots had excellent training and combat experience. The Japanese split up to attack both carriers. Torpedo bombers divided into groups to attack from different directions. This was classic tactics, making it difficult for the target to maneuver. Dive bombers positioned themselves to attack from above. American ships opened massive anti-aircraft fire, the sky filled with bursting anti-aircraft shells. Yorktown maneuvered energetically, evading torpedoes. The ship's captain, Elliot Buckmaster, skillfully handled the vessel. The carrier avoided all torpedoes in the first wave of attack. However, a dive bomber managed to break through the fire. An 800-kilogram bomb hit the center of the flight deck. The explosion penetrated several decks and caused serious internal damage. The fire was quickly contained. Yorktown maintained combat effectiveness. Lexington came under a more concentrated attack. Torpedo bombers attacked the ship from both sides almost simultaneously. Captain Frederick Sherman tried to maneuver, but evading all the torpedoes was impossible. Two torpedoes hit the carrier's port side. The explosions caused serious hull damage and flooding of several compartments. The ship developed a list to port. Dive bombers attacked Lexington from above. Two bombs hit the ship, causing fires and additional damage. However, the large carrier stayed afloat and maintained speed. Damage control parties fought fires and pumped out water. The list was partially corrected by counter-flooding compartments on the starboard side. Lexington continued moving at about 20 knots. The Japanese aircraft, having completed their attack, set course for home. Their losses were relatively light. American fighters and anti-aircraft fire shot down about 20 Japanese planes. The rest returned safely to Zuikaku. The damaged Shokaku couldn't recover aircraft and began withdrawing from the combat zone. After repelling the Japanese attack, it seemed that Lexington had weathered the test. Fires were mostly extinguished. The ship maintained speed. Aircraft from the strike group were returning from the attack on the Japanese. The carrier began recovering her aircraft. Several planes had already landed on deck. The crew worked on repairing the damage. About an hour after the attack, the first internal explosion occurred. Gasoline vapors from damaged fuel systems had accumulated in closed compartments. A spark triggered detonation of the vapors. The explosion shook the entire ship. New fires broke out in the area of the aviation fuel systems. The situation began to deteriorate rapidly. More explosions followed. Fires spread through the ship, spiraling out of control. Electrical systems failed. Fire suppression systems stopped working. The temperature inside the ship became unbearable. Smoke filled compartments. The crew continued the fight, but the forces were unequal. By midday, it became clear that the ship couldn't be saved. Admiral Fletcher ordered the crew evacuated. Destroyers came alongside the burning carrier. Sailors descended on ropes and jumped into the water. Destroyers picked up men from the water. The evacuation continued for several hours in an orderly fashion. On the evening of May 8th, a destroyer approached the abandoned Lexington and fired several torpedoes. The torpedo explosions completed the destruction of the hull. The great carrier slowly listed to port. The stern went under first. Within minutes, Lexington disappeared beneath the waters of the Coral Sea. More than 200 sailors perished with the ship. The rest of the crew, numbering over 2,000, was rescued. After losing Lexington, Admiral Fletcher had only one operational carrier with a partially damaged deck. The Japanese retained one undamaged carrier, but had lost many experienced pilots. Both sides suffered significant losses in aircraft and crews. On May 9th, the opponents broke contact and began withdrawing from the combat zone. Japanese command canceled the operation to capture Port Moresby by sea. The invasion convoy turned back. The strategic objective of the operation had not been achieved. Shokaku, with serious damage, headed to Japan for repairs. Zuikaku, though undamaged, had lost a significant portion of her air group and also withdrew from active operations. The Americans lost a large carrier, but saved Port Moresby. Yorktown, with damage, headed to Pearl Harbor for repairs. Losses in aircraft and crews were substantial on both sides. However, American industry could replace these losses faster than Japanese industry. The Battle of the Coral Sea was over. By formal loss calculations, the Japanese had a tactical advantage. They sank a large enemy carrier, losing only a light carrier. However, strategically, the battle was an American victory. Japanese offensive momentum had been stopped for the first time since the war began. The Battle of the Coral Sea forever entered the history of naval warfare. For the first time in history, two fleets conducted a major naval battle in which opposing ships never saw each other. The entire battle was fought by carrier aviation. The artillery of surface ships didn't fire a single shot at enemy carriers. This was a new era of naval warfare. The battle demonstrated the decisive role of carriers in the Pacific War. Classic battleships with powerful artillery were relegated to a secondary role. The future belonged to carriers and carrier aviation. The range of aircraft exceeded the range of ship guns by tens of times. The fleet that first discovered the enemy and struck from the air gained a decisive advantage. The battle showed the importance of reconnaissance and signals intelligence. The American ability to read Japanese codes allowed them to learn enemy plans in advance. This became a critical factor in success. Without this knowledge, American carriers might not have been in the right place at the right time. The battle revealed problems on both sides. American torpedoes showed low reliability and effectiveness. Japanese pilots demonstrated a high level of training, but suffered losses in experienced crews that were difficult to replace. Coordination between reconnaissance and strike groups required improvement on both sides. The Battle of the Coral Sea had direct consequences for the next major battle in the Pacific. 1 month after the events in the Coral Sea, the Battle of Midway occurred. The Japanese plan for Midway called for the participation of all available carriers. However, Shokaku was still under repair from damage sustained in the Coral Sea. Zuikaku was rebuilding her air group and couldn't participate in the operation. Thus, the Japanese fleet was deprived of 2 experienced carriers in a critically important battle. This absence may have been one of the factors in Japan's defeat at Midway. Yorktown, despite her damage, was urgently repaired at Pearl Harbor in 3 days. The carrier managed to participate in the Battle of Midway, where she played an important role in locating and attacking Japanese carriers. Yorktown's presence strengthened the American formation at a critical moment. The experience of Coral Sea was studied by both sides. The Americans refined tactics for employing carrier groups and coordination between ships. The Japanese analyzed their mistakes and losses. The lessons of this battle were used in subsequent operations. Behind the dry figures of losses and tactical diagrams stood thousands of people. Carrier crews worked under extreme conditions. On the flight decks, intensive work prepared aircraft. Mechanics refueled planes, loaded weapons, checked systems. Each takeoff and landing on the pitching deck required skill and courage. Pilots flew over the boundless ocean, knowing that a navigation error could mean death. Fuel was sufficient for a certain flight time. Finding your carrier in the ocean was no simple task. Many aircraft didn't return to base, falling into the water due to fuel shortage or damage. Crews of damaged ships fought for their vessel's survival. Fire parties worked in smoke and flames. Damage control teams patched holes and pumped out water. Medics helped the wounded in the sick bays of rolling ships. Everyone performed their duty under mortal danger. Sailors from Lexington, abandoning the dying ship, said goodbye to a vessel that had become their home. Many had spent years of service on this carrier. The ship went under, taking with it part of their lives. The rescued crews were placed on other ships of the formation, grieving for lost comrades. Japanese pilots returning to their carriers after the attack saw empty places in formation. Not everyone returned from battle. Losses of experienced pilots were especially painful for the Japanese fleet. Training new crews required time that Japan had less and less of. The battle revealed numerous tactical problems that both sides would need to solve. Coordination between reconnaissance and strike groups proved more complex than anticipated. Errors in scout reports led to attacks on wrong targets or loss of precious time. American torpedo bombers carried obsolete torpedoes with unreliable detonators. Many torpedoes didn't explode on impact or passed under the target at the wrong depth. This problem plagued the American fleet for a long time and required urgent solution. Fighter cover for carriers showed its importance. Japanese Zero fighters outmaneuvered American aircraft. However, American pilots gradually developed tactics for fighting the more agile opponent, using advantages of their aircraft in armament and structural strength. Managing air combat from a carrier presented a serious problem. Radars were just beginning to be used in the fleet. Coordinating combat air patrol fighters, intercepting enemy groups, managing strike groups. All this required a well-coordinated system of communications and control. Carrier survivability depended not only on structural strength, but on the organization of damage control. The Americans learned lessons from Lexington's loss. Aviation fuel storage systems required improvement. Gasoline vapors represented a mortal danger to the ship, even after eliminating direct combat damage. The Battle of the Coral Sea became Japan's first strategic defeat in the Pacific War. For the first time since the conflict began, Japanese offensive momentum was stopped. Port Moresby remained in Allied hands. The direct threat to Australia was eliminated. The Japanese plan to isolate Australia had failed. Further attempts to capture Port Moresby would require a land offensive through the jungles of New Guinea. This stretched Japanese communications and diverted significant forces to a secondary theater of operations. The psychological effect of the battle was significant. American sailors and pilots proved they could fight the Japanese fleet on equal terms. The myth of the invincibility of Japanese naval forces received its first crack. This raised the morale of Allied forces throughout the Pacific theater. For Japan, the battle was a warning about the growing power of the American fleet. Time worked against the Japanese Empire. American industry was increasing production of ships and aircraft at rates unattainable for the Japanese economy. Each loss of experienced pilots weakened Japanese aviation. The Battle of the Coral Sea definitively demonstrated the revolution in naval warfare. The era of battleships as the main striking force of the fleet had ended. Carriers became the foundation of naval power. The nation controlling airspace over the ocean controlled the ocean itself. The distance between opposing fleets during battle exceeded 200 kilometers. Ships were beyond the horizon from each other. The outcome of battle was decided in the air, not by artillery fire. Admirals commanded the battle by radio, receiving reports from pilots and scouts. The speed of events increased many times over. From detecting the enemy to delivering a strike took mere hours. Decisions had to be made quickly, often based on incomplete information. Errors in assessing the situation could lead to catastrophic consequences. The role of reconnaissance and signals intelligence became critically important. Knowledge of enemy plans gave enormous advantage. Decrypting enemy messages became a weapon no less significant than torpedoes and bombs. War was waged not only at sea and in the air, but in the ether. The place where Lexington sank became a war grave for hundreds of sailors. The ship rests on the bottom of the Coral Sea at a depth of more than 3 kilometers. Modern expeditions have discovered the carrier's remains, preserved in the cold, deep waters. The ship remains a monument to those who fought and died in this battle. The names of fallen sailors and pilots are engraved on memorials in the United States and Australia. Battle veterans gathered annually for reunions, remembering the events of those May days. Over the years, there were fewer and fewer of them. The last witnesses of the battle have passed away, but memory of the battle is preserved. Historians continue to study documents and materials from the battle. New archives open, participants' memoirs are published. Every detail helps to more fully understand the events of those days. The tactical decisions of admirals are analyzed in military academies as classic examples of carrier warfare. The Battle of the Coral Sea lasted only a few days, but its significance cannot be overstated. The battle became a turning point in the Pacific War. Japanese offensive momentum was stopped. The initiative gradually began passing to the Allies. For the first time in history, two fleets conducted a major naval battle using aviation alone. Enemy ships didn't see each other and didn't exchange artillery fire. The entire battle was fought by carrier aviation at distances unthinkable for traditional naval combat. This was a new era, the era of carriers and air power over the ocean. The Americans' tactical losses were greater than the Japanese, but strategically, the battle was an Allied victory. Port Moresby remained under Allied control. Japanese advancement to the south was halted. Two Japanese carriers couldn't participate in the next critical battle at Midway. Events in the Coral Sea showed that the war would be long and bloody. Both sides suffered serious losses. However, the industrial potential of the United States allowed losses to be replaced faster than the enemy could. Time worked against the Japanese Empire. The Battle of the Coral Sea forever entered the history of naval warfare. The battle demonstrated the new reality of naval war, where air supremacy meant supremacy at sea. The lessons of this battle were studied and applied in all subsequent naval operations of the Pacific War. The waters of the Coral Sea preserve the memory of those days. On the bottom rest ships and aircraft, witnesses to the first battle of the new era. Thousands of people participated in this battle. Many didn't return home. Their sacrifice was not in vain. The battle became an important step on the long road to victory.